Well, just when you thought the Victorian Premier and Vic Health couldn't possibly stuff up the handling of this pandemic any more than they already have, Chairman Dan, well, he's outdone himself. On Tuesday, he was not entertaining having the ADF help out in Victoria, no. Yesterday, he asked the PM to send them down, and today we even got a full rundown of how they'd be used. 1,000 were on their way, an ADF medical team would be used for testing and treatment. Vehicles and drivers would be employed to transport lab samples. They'd be assisting at testing sites. They would provide quarantine support and a great deal of logistical expertise. Big job, but in terms of logistics, that's something they are trained to do. But then this afternoon, it was all off again. Now, the words being used included, they've been sent back. The request has been renounced. They would be delayed. And there's been no reason for the change of heart. These were all contained in stories this afternoon. Talk about indecision, exactly what the panicked people of Victoria do not need. Now, former Victorian Liberal Party President Michael Kroger has the inside story on this, and it stinks to high heaven. Michael, good evening to you.
G'day, mate. How are you?
I'm very, very well. He didn't want the ADF involved. He then did. In fact, today he had them all assigned to particular jobs, and no doubt they'd done some work assigning their own people to those jobs. And then this afternoon it was all off. What's the story?
This is bizarre. It's a mess. You know, as I've said, these state governments have handled the first part of this crisis very well, and all credit to them, 104 deaths. It's a great result. But you've got to get the second part right. It's as equally as important. It's, you know, to the future. And bringing the ADF down here, as you've just chronicled, it was no, yes, no, yes. And all of a sudden, we find that, no, they're not coming. To an 850,000 are not coming to help with the testing and the isolation, the transporting of people, etc. And everyone around Melbourne has been buzzing tonight with why? No explanation's been given. And the very strong rumours coming out of the Victorian Labor government is that the police union have lent on Daniel Andrews, who you've got to remember, Chris, is in a very weakened political position internally within the ALP because of recent events that we all know about and don't need to go through again. But the very strong view is the police union have lent on Andrews and said to him, under no circumstances is the ADF going to come in here with 1,000 people and do the job to supplement the police. The police can do it. Now, the answer is we don't have enough police. We don't have enough protective service officers, etc., health workers. That's why Andrews quite sensibly said, hey, let's bring in 1,000 extra people. I mean, what harm does it do? None. In fact, Chris, it would be a great thing in Victoria because you'd have door-to-door visits, door-to-door testing now that we've got a new system, all the other things they could be doing. But Andrews has been lent on, so I'm told, by the police union, have said, not on our patch.
See, that's interesting, Michael.
And in his weakened state, Andrews is now buckling.
See, that makes sense, because you look at the way the police softly dealt with gang crime in Victoria, and they made sure that Daniel Andrews was always on the same page about, there not being a gang problem in Victoria, until that changed a little bit. That makes sense. They wield enormous power, the union movement in Victoria.
Enormous. Look, the police union in Victoria are very, very powerful, as are all the trade unions. I mean, Labor are the strongest in Victoria. People ask me why. I said, well, because the ACTU headquarters is here. Most of the unions are headquartered here. They have a massive number of union officials and staff here to help with their political campaigns, etc. But they have enormous power within the Victorian Labor Party, and the police union leaning on Andrews means that he's not really in a position at the minute to have any more fights with unions, given that he's got potential court actions over the National Executive interfering in the Victorian division. So what we're hearing tonight is Andrews has said, OK, and he's buckled under this pressure. And now we find these 800 or 850 or 1,000 Defence Force personnel at the minute are not coming. Now, they're saying, they're readjusting the position, but this is a scandal.
It's just a scandal, and it's extraordinary. But can I just also add, it sends a bad message to Victorians once again. They sent a bad message about protest. He's sending a bad message about 1 minute he's doing something, then he's not, then he is, then he's not. Most of the people in Victoria are spooked at the moment, and if you look at the shelves of the supermarkets, it is not the way to lead the state through a pandemic.
No. We've become very isolated from the rest of the country in terms of how we're now dealing with this within the state. The borders is another issue, but within the state, numbers are increasing. Okay, they're not disastrous levels, but there are talks now about whether he's going to lock down particular suburbs, which is upsetting a whole lot of people.
Yeah.
The Black Lives Matter protest was a disaster in Victoria in that it clearly said to people, I've had 1 million people say to me, Chris, 10,000 can turn up in the city and only three get fined. Why can't we have 50 people in a restaurant or to a party or something, a community sport, whatever? So the mixed messages here are terrible. And now there's 4 changes of view within 3 days on this issue. People down here just think Daniel Andrews and the government here have basically just lost control of the streets and lost control of Victoria.
Can I ask you something? Still union related.
Yeah.
I heard the union say and argue, JobKeeper should have been kept on for these 6,000 people who were retrenched today from Qantas, but, they may not have a shot at a job for 4 years from now. So why aren't the unions doing something to put a fighting fund together of membership money to help these people? Put money where their mouth is.
Hey, great question. Great question. You look at the Transport Workers Union. They're calling on the federal government to put in more money, resolve JobKeeper, put in more money, keep people employed, et cetera, because of the parlous state of the airline industry. We understand that. The Transport Workers Union, the very union, Chris, that are calling on the government to put in more money, sold their building in Sussex Street, Sydney in April, the Financial Review reported, for $29 million. Now, that asset they held from 1975, I think it was onwards, so it's a pre-capital gains tax issue. There's no tax. They've got $29 million in the bank, effectively, or if they're about to, if it hasn't settled yet, 60 days, what's that, April, June? They've probably got $29 million in the bank or thereabouts.
There's your fighting fund.
Well, please, Chris, I say to the TWU tonight, please put $10 million aside into a fighting fund, a fighting fund for Qantas workers and other workers in the transport industry who you are meant to represent. What are these assets for?
Yeah.
Chris, they're for a rainy day. Yeah. And, mate, it is snowing. It is pouring. There is a tsunami out there. Please show compassion. Put $10 million aside of that money and help these workers because, Joyce said today he's not going to open international airlines probably till July next year. Well, we all know what that means. No, international flights, no overseas flights. Yeah. No ground crew, no staff, no pilots, no cabin crew. Please put $10 million aside and help these workers. Don't just ask the federal government. Michael
Kroger, thank you so much for your time and thank you for that information on the union impact on the decision on ADF. There you go, Michael Kroger.